Just,
I've known you such a long time, Jay. We should do a double act after this.
We know that GE is heading into a new direction, a really separate companies. And so I thought it would be nice for us to really look at the legacy of learning and leadership at Crotonville. Welcome, Doug Scott. Welcome, Jay Moore. You're not really new to iVentiv, but for people that don't know who you are, can you just introduce yourselves and let us know who you are?
Why don't you start, Jay?
Oh, thanks, Doug. So Jay Moore, I'm based in the States and currently working with General Electric, and I have oversight for two areas. The first being the Crotonville campus, and the second area that I have responsibility for is the separation management office for learning. So as we are building the future for the separations and spins of the company, myself and the team are working on building out the learning strategy and the structure as it relates to the businesses as they move forward into 2024. And Doug, hand it to you.
Oh, thank you, Jay. I'm Doug Scott. I'll start at the back and work forwards. I joined GE in 2006, and with the great pleasure of working in Crotonville from 2010 through to mid 2021. I worked in commercial. I looked after commercial leadership, and then I moved into the executive leadership division of Crotonville. Real pleasure to go there an awful lot. So I worked in Europe and I worked in the States a lot. Had a real pleasure of working with Jay for over 10 years.
That's right.
Bizarrely, we're all still in touch with each other. So I left in 2021 and set up my own consultancy. I still do a reasonable amount of work with the various GE divisions, and also obviously spend a bit of time with iVentiv chairing some of your meetings, which is a real pleasure to give a bit back and to meet the fantastic people that come along to the iVentiv sessions. And I'm just outside London, just to the north of London.
Thank you very much. We wanted to bring you on because I think we were having conversations before we press record, but when you think of GE, you definitely think of Crotonville, and there's this huge sort of brand that's associated with GE, and we wanted to tap into that and really tap into some of the memories because you've both had such extensive careers at the company. So what I'd really like to know is, what was the inspiration behind Crotonville, this beautiful campus, and how did it impact the company culture?
Okay,
great. Yeah, Doug, thanks. So Temi, to that question, I'll rewind the clock a little bit, right? So it really takes its origins back in 1956 when it was opened. And this was at a time when the CEO, Ralph Cordnier, had been looking at how does he scale out, as they termed it at that time, professional managers at scale. So think of the global environment in the mid-50s, a lot of growth post-World War II, and how do you scale out in a big way professional managers across the company? So if you look at the opening date of January of 1956, it was a 12-week program on the campus.
Oh.
So think of it in terms of an accelerated MBA. So that's where inspiration of Crotonville occurred back in 1956. But then if you take that clock and move it to today, right? That inspiration, I think, has just been indoctrinated since that time. So with each CEO, with each decade, that inspiration as it relates to building the company culture and supporting the company strategy, I think those are the two pieces where everything meets, Temi, as it relates to the inspiration. And now we're in a new day and age with the company, right? As we go through a new GE and spin off into these separate companies. So now the goal is, how do we take those great legacies and cultural areas and those business units making their own? So that's what I would start with. Doug, what would you add on to that in your experiences on the inspiration question?
Yeah, thanks, Jay. And I think you've really touched on the core piece there, which is it's about the what and the how. So Crotonville is about how we do things. I mean, lean was a huge piece during, well, still is, but really
that's right.
From Jack Welch's leadership all the way through all the Jeff and everyone else, it's been a core piece. But the other side of the leadership is about, how do we do that? How do we make leaders who people want to work really hard for but enjoy it? How do we help leaders who just need to get that emotional intelligence, to get that piece where they work through their people, having their people do the work, and what leadership do we need to do? And some of that is people understanding what they have to let go of, as well as helping people have humility, vulnerability as leaders. Because if we boil the whole ethos of Crotonville down, is to make everyone's job a little bit better because the leader is a good leader. That's what we're trying to do. And as a result of that, we get two things. We get great retention, because if someone's trying to poach one of our people, they lose Crotonville. And that has a significant value. And secondly, people want to come and have that. Now, it's interesting because it's not just the building and the amazing campus as it is. It's wonderful. It's actually the brand of the GE leadership piece. It's the brand of how does GE lead its people to be good leaders. And that doesn't, it's great doing it in a lovely campus, and it's really important we have everyone there to discuss and talk. But we ran Crotonville all over the world as well, in satellites from Crotonville, Europe, to Crotonville in China, all over the world. So Crotonville wasn't just located north of New York. It really had a significant footprint that was real across pretty much every continent in the world.
Right.
I love the association with Crotonville and like emotional intelligence, that you almost like had this space where leaders were really able to work on what we call power skills. And you also mentioned Jack Welch as well. And I think that's really interesting, because when you think of GE, he was a really, a prominent leader in the organization. And so I'm curious, from both your perspective, which leaders have inspired you the most, and what key lessons have you learned from them?
So I wasn't lucky enough to meet Jack. I spent a reasonable amount of time with Jeff, given the various roles that I did in Crotonville. And I think, every leader has great qualities, and every leader has areas that they're super strong in. What we kind of need to remember is there are different times, there's different environments, and there are different places companies and governments and countries are going in. So I struggle when people say, what is great leadership? Because I think different times and needs require different skills. I'll give you a classic, if we look at, the UK, when we came out of the Second World War, Winston Churchill was our prime minister, but he probably wasn't the right prime minister when we weren't going through tough times, as everybody was. So, he moved on. So I'd take that back to companies and say, depends where we are as to what particular skills leaders need to bring out. And in the world right now, with the bank just going bust last week, I'm guessing there are very different entrepreneurial skills that leaders need to have in managing their businesses as they try and find funding, etc., given the turmoil that happened last week, versus when everything was fine and we were just trying to be entrepreneurial. So in a roundabout way, I'd say I think we need to look at the various elements that make great leadership and who flex them and use them at the right time. And I'll be honest, I had a great education at GE, and I think all the leadership, the senior leadership, and I was very lucky to work with most of them. I genuinely think I took something from all of them, but it was different from each person.
Yeah.
I would add on to that, Doug. I'm sorry, Temi. It is for the moment in time.
Yeah.
Right. So you look at what Jack Welch had to solve for, which was different than what Immelt had to solve for, which is different for what Larry Culp is solving for at this time. So I think the fact that, leaders contextually having to manage through those moments, and then what we, from a learning perspective, it goes a bit, Doug, to what you were saying, as far as there are things that you have to leave behind and things that you have to grasp to go forward with, because each is solving for a different particular need at that time, and in very complex times, right? And these dynamics ever changing. So it's never one moment. And our job, I think, as learning professionals, is to really hone in on that at that moment and determine when you make that shift to help the company navigate that next wave, right? So that's something I've always been proud of with Doug and our teams, is that no matter what the moment was that we were called upon, we would certainly hone in onto what are those capabilities that need to be built, and then what are the cultural levers that we need to reinforce at that moment. And this is a team, and Doug, we've gone through enough episodes, right, over the years, that are just so close to their client base that we're able to turn really quickly to the need at those moments in time to take us to that next stage. So I just didn't want to lose sight of that, Temi, because that's just like a really important point that Doug highlighted in that question.
There's one other thing I would add, which really builds on what you were saying, Jay, is the caliber of Crotonville is fantastic. Not just the buildings, but the people who work there teaching, but also everything else behind the scenes that allows the magic to happen. And I think one of the critical things that Crotonville had that really sets it apart is trust. So big senior leaders running billion-dollar businesses, when they come and work with Crotonville professionals, they trust us to know what we're doing and to add value and to help them. And that reduces barriers really quickly. And that helps change to help with cultural, putting culture in place, helping pivot around various things. That happens much faster because there is that common theme of trust, and we're all there for the same purpose. And there's an understanding there. So I think that really helped as we went through the various journeys GE's been through to help us, as Crotonville, help that journey go quickly and go easier.
And I'll hook on that, Doug, because Temi, this is something that I had actually shared at a previous iVentiv conference. I think it was last year when we were at LinkedIn. And Doug, what I had shared just from a reflection point was very much around what you're describing here, because every business is going to go through a series of cycles. Every business is going to go through a measure of centralization and decentralization, right? And I think the way in which people work with each other, whether you're at a corporate function or you're at a business level, how you treat and work and build that trust, Doug, that you're describing, I'll tell you, it just makes a tremendous difference. So when you're going through those changes, as we're going through those changes now, it is either going to be a roadblock or it's going to accelerate the agenda. I'm seeing it right now as we're going through just the separations and spins, just how well these teams work together, because over the period of years that we've worked together, there's a tremendous amount of trust that's been built. And we're able to go through that project plan and hit the risk and get to the real truth of the matter because of that. So that's a big reflection point for me, Doug, because I see this playing out now as I've seen it play out in just so many other situations that we've had in the company cycles.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that helps that trust, and I'm quite lucky now because obviously I get to work with lots of my old colleagues at Crotonville, which is lovely, but I also get to see other businesses globally, right. From Azerbaijan through to Americas, etc. And the interesting thing with Crotonville is it's also rankless. Now, whatever we classify various people in our organizations as, everyone has a rank system of some sort, whether it be numbers or letters. In Crotonville, if I'm an officer, so one of the top leaders in GE, and I come down into the dining room, I sit at a table, and around me could be the newest, most junior person in the company, all the way through to people just at my level or below. And the whole point is you sit wherever you sit and the conversation flows. And that is a magic in itself that comes out of the construct of the campus. Designed, and I know, Jay, you were involved with the design of the refresh of the campus, but really that designed to allow people to flow across all levels and conversations to happen. Because I still think, I would say, maybe 2/3 of the learning happens with our colleagues and in the various classrooms and events that we attend. But I still say 1/3 happens when we're relaxed, we're having a cup of coffee, we're having a conversation with someone. And we also make connections that we wouldn't naturally make with people in different businesses and different functions within a business. And that really helps accelerate this change you talked about, Jay, as the company moves forwards.
Yeah, and we see it today with Larry and his lean journey for the company. It's this notion of flipping that triangle upside down, where leaders with their humility and respect for people being close to the front lines, Doug. And when you have places like this, whether it's in New York or, Doug, in the regions that you've traveled across the globe, as well as the clients, Doug, that you're working outside of now, what a great opportunity for learning when you have a leader that's part of that curation to hear it firsthand, to take the layers out and to be able to validate assumptions that they may be hearing at their staff level, but can now get some truth at the front line to help validate, right, and bring things back. So I think good learning organizations do a good job of listening skills, engagement skills, invested skills, so that as a leader, those typical blind spots, Doug, right, that leaders have, where they're not seeing their message resonate or strategy resonate, from the very top to where those are the most critical sides of the business. It's another great opportunity by which to validate.
Yeah, and there's a couple of things that happened in Crotonville that really talked to that. One was I remember a class I ran for midlife executives, as in not midlife executives, they've been an executive for a little while, ELC, and it was really focusing on emotional intelligence. And one of the tasks that I gave them was every morning we start the class at 8 a.m., but I want them to turn up at 9 a.m. And in that hour, they can do whatever they want, apart from work. So they would talk to colleagues, they'd have a walk, even have a lie in if they've got young children. Do you know what a great opportunity? But the whole point is looking after the human being there. And sometimes we get that refocus just to reset. And that's another piece that Crotonville was great at. And the other side was, I think you were maybe involved with setting us up, Jay, was we had a program called Leader in Residence. Every week, we had a very senior leader come and they would get rid of all their work, and they're very busy people, and they would immerse themselves. And I think, they go to all the classes, they introduce, they do some talks. And I think the value of that when it first started was not really recognized until the first couple of sessions ran. It was like, wow, the information they get, the understanding, but also the relationships that people have with GE and its senior leaders when you're further down the pecking order was just fantastic. And the availability when they were there for that week for anyone to talk to them was a real critical, fantastic piece of leadership.
It was a great practice, Doug. It's one that, and I played a small part in it. Others played a much larger role in that, where we took that virtual. And, oftentimes as I would have a debrief, Doug and Temi, around that leader in residence, in every single month, it was so identical. Every conversation I'd have a debrief with, the leader in residence would say how much they gained more than what they felt the participants gained, which I just thought was a wonderful tribute, right, to the time they have. And look, that the company would vest that much time and hours, right, for leaders to engage and be out of their space with our participants. So Temi, I'm going to just pause a moment, because you can already tell with Doug and I,
this
right?
is great. This is great content. It's just like reminiscing. But I do think it's a nice place to pause, because there's two things that I wanted to sort of bring up.
Sure.
The first thing that I noticed is that there's clearly at Crotonville you were able to cultivate a really engaged leadership. Like, it seems that when they stepped on, they were really engaged. They were able to really tap in and really reflect and take that time to work on their leadership skills. And then you both kept mentioning trust. Like, there was this, trust, and that how it played such a key role in all the changes that have happened. You've got people in the team that are behind all the changes because there's a real sense of trust. What I want to know is, how did you create that? You're a huge organization, like you mentioned, all over the world. How were you able to create that culture of trust?
So I can pick up with a couple of things if you like. I mean, I think that the first thing is, as I say, the structure of Crotonville, not the buildings, but the whole brand of Crotonville, leaders teaching leaders, leaders learning from leaders up and down, is kind of it really is the secret sauce of this is how stuff's done. And the interesting thing is, if people lack vulnerability, we usually have some barriers that we put in place. And at Crotonville, that really sticks out, and it doesn't stick out in a comfortable way. So, and there's plenty of people to help you to unpack that, because nobody does it because they want to do it. They do it for a reason. So, and that's why I say the trust of the staff, and we're noticing, and the trust of your colleagues. So that's really a big piece that's in there. And the other side I'd say is, one of the big drivers for us is understanding who you are as a person, understanding who you are as a leader, and understanding what you're like to work with, either as a peer or a report. And when you really take some time to look at that in a safe space that Crotonville is, that just it just grows and grows and grows and spreads. And I'll give you an example of another piece of trust, if you like, that I almost get into trouble with when I was at Crotonville. I was running a class called BMC, And I said to my boss at the time, a lady called Kimberly, wonderful lady, and I said, I want to do, one of our themes was trust. I said, I want to do a fire walk. And she scowled at me across the desk as if to say, that will never happen. We got the man who teaches Tony Robbins people who teach firewalking. He flew in from Hawaii, and we ran a firewalking session for 50 people 3 times that year. Nobody told anyone, apart from Jeff, who did say to me, would you please not burn my people, Doug? but that trust in me to take that and do that in order to drive, because they were then going away for 2 weeks to do a huge project all around the world, big stress. And that really worked. And they remember that. So the trust of the staff to just go outside the box in order to get the outcome. It's all encompassing. It's not just trust one way. It really is it's an enveloping trust across the board.
Yeah, I would say it's that ecosystem, Doug. And then, Temi, you also have to think through, we come from a very strong engineering culture and continuous improvement type of culture as well. So when we just look at the organizational structure and the system that we built to enable that scale, it was impressive, right? It wasn't, we didn't have thousands of people in order to get this done, but I will say we had a group that we had some of the most talented people from a faculty development, coordination, scheduling, planning, forecasting, sourcing matter that you could get done, right? So you would break down at a regional level, the faculty, the external partners that we had, the coordination that was required across this time. I mean, some of the most critical roles were the coordinators in this aspect that we have. The business level partnership, working with the HR teams and the senior business leaders. And then, Doug, I think part of what you said, the fact that we could really fine tune things contextually as it relates to what do we need to drive across the company, and then what are those nuances at a regional level, those nuances at a functional level, those nuances at a business level. And that system just fed into itself. And we gave enough autonomy, Temi, to be able to take care of bespoke needs at a regional level. And we had a cadence by which things were really clear and open, by which we could share what was occurring and then what was occurring across regions to be able to build upon that. So those systems and structures were really important with that. And when you're working with a number of years with teams and you have the relationships built and the trust built, things just go faster, right? And then you're able to get the scalability that we were able to see. And that scalability and knowledge transfer is what we've been bringing to the businesses. It's something that Doug and his peers and colleagues have built in. It's what we're continuing to build in now. So as these businesses go forward, they're taking the best of those things and then making it their own for their new strategies as they go forward. So I hope that helps in some way.
That does. Oh, you wanted to say something, Joe?
I was going to say, I just add one thing to what you're saying and hook onto it with me. If you also look at 2 things. One, I look at the faculty that were external that we employed within the company to come and run various courses, and it was really funny because when they were on campus, it's kind of like they were part of Crotonville.
Mm-hmm.
There was an inclusivity that went beyond the company, and that helped the brand because the brand is super high quality. We're not afraid to ask difficult questions because that's why we're there to really move forwards. And the other piece is around collaboration. And I think the best example I would have around noticing that is when GE and GE purchased Alstom back in 2015, or the starts of it. And I remember meeting several of the Alstom senior leaders on Crotonville campus. And one, they loved the campus, but 2, the meetings that were had amongst the senior leadership teams to figure out what this was going to look like moving forwards. And, I think those meetings happened better in that campus because collaboration and trust was kind of implicitly expected, and not expected as in you're told, but it just felt the right thing to do. And so it wasn't just learning, it was also helping the business move its business forward at pace easier. And I use the word easier, not meaning it's easy, but meaning the things that get in the way that really just cause us distress, that don't help us get to the end point, they kind of seem a lot less there.
That's right. Absolutely. Because it was like that ground where it's, the agendas tend to be more on the outcome, Doug, of what we were trying to solve for. And that was trying to solve for a better performance issue or some form of a better area of teaming that we were asked to do. And And the folks we've had on our teams over the years were just like master at facilitation, Temi. And being able to have conversations, whether it's with customer groups or with senior leaders or partners, and having that. And one other piece too, Doug, that you gave me a little pause and reflection on to the question, Temi, is just this notion that we would always have space by which you're just never satisfied, right? Yeah, as a faculty member, you would always build into, okay, what is it that I can do at the next program that I can just try differently, right? What is it that I can do as you triangulate the data that comes from participants, your own views, the faculty that you're working with, and then sharing that across a learning network. And look, Doug, maybe there's a little friendly competition along the way as well, right? It's that we would have that would help us just keep raising the bar, right?
Yeah, and I think if I look at what I see, and we all see it around the world, is I think the Crotonville faculty had that piece. I still have that piece of it wasn't turning up and delivering. It was turning out and taking people to the outcome we need as far as what we think, what we feel, what we do, and also what other people will notice 6 months, a year down the line as we lead. And we were on that journey with, MDC, there was 100 people for 2 weeks, or the smaller bespoke, small group meetings we had. Every time the Crotonville faculty were immersed and they had a responsibility to be part of that outcome to help the people get there. So it wasn't like I've done my job, I've done my week or 2 weeks, and I'm stepping away. It's kind of not how it happened. And I think that responsibility and that ownership for the souls you have and the place you're trying to take them, it genuinely had a very big part in making Crotonville a success that it was.
Well said.
I'm going to shift gears. Thank you. No, thank you both for that. I'm going to shift gears slightly because I think it's so fascinating, hearing really what the brand meant to you and from your experiences, I'm hearing collaboration, leaders learning from, not leaders learning from each other, everybody learning from each other, real sense of trust. But, when we look at the world of work today, it is looking quite different. I mean, we're seeing the introduction of 4-day weeks, working weeks. We're obviously seeing, a greater focus on hybrid working. And so I'm, with the conversation that we've had about this amazing brand that you've had and what it did for you and what it's done for even the people that are working in the organization, I'm curious to hear your perspective on what does the future of work look like, to you, but also, do you think there's still space for a sort of a corporate university today?
Yeah. So Doug, I'll give a shot at this and probably play off of your reaction as well. And look, I'll just state for the record, I'm not an expert in this field. I'm not a futurist when it comes to, so it's going to be more my personal observations. And here are the signals I see, Temi, right? It's I think it's what we've learned coming out of the pandemic that just has accelerated learning strategies over that time to what we had an eye for. You do see more flexibility, right? The virtual engagement, this would have taken us months in planning if we tried to get together around a coffee table versus what we're able to do just in a couple of weeks in scheduling. It's less about the hours that you put in, but more of the quality and the output. And, I was fortunate in the construct of where I had worked. I had both the physical ground and classroom, but I also had this global team that was working remotely already. Well before, years before, right? The pandemic, we had been, I think, a very high performing virtual working team. And what we had to really shift was the means of delivery. So for me, what I see, you look at the flexibility side of the equation, you look at the ability to share knowledge in faster ways. And that impact on learning means that we have to continue to model and support that, right? And how that's getting delivered and how that's getting consumed. And I still think that there's a place for when you're going to have face-to-face opportunities. And there's still going to be areas of where virtual is just going to be so much more effective in that phase. And I think that mix is going to shift as the needs shift going forward. And right now, what I'm witnessing is that I just think of this. I was just having a conversation with somebody this week. Our campus a year ago in Crotonville was closed down. A year ago. Right? That's not too far along in time. And you're seeing just this great thirst and hunger for people to have conversations in a face-to-face way. So that pendulum that went all one way to the virtual side, you're starting to see a little bit of a shift of where having those interactions, moving that needle, but that needle's never going to be exactly where it was before. And I think businesses, I think it's going to be part of the skill and the constant experimentation. You're always going to be kind of tweaking those calipers of virtual and the physical and the peer networking and coaching and self-learning. You're going to constantly be moving those dials. And it's going to be based upon what you're trying to solve for in that moment at time. So that's what I would share. Now, Doug, you're probably going to add some thoughts to that, but that's kind of where I view it at this moment.
Yeah, and I agree with you. I really do. I think we're still working it out. I think
Right.
we've gone, the pendulum swung so far one way and the other. I think if I look at me personally, the amount of virtual work I learned to do, hopefully quite well, happened because of the COVID crisis. I mean, before I was forever having a conversation with my virtual colleagues going, well, it's not as good, it's not. Do you know, I'm a convert. I genuinely think you can do amazing work, you can do amazing breadth, you can take such a huge scope in virtually, and I do a lot of my work virtually. I think there's a couple of things. I think, you know, once we've worked it out, I think people do get energy from being with each other, though, from being face to face. And I kind of think information and learning we can do virtually really well. I think when we come to behavioral change or cultural change, when it's difficult, I think having humans with humans makes it, it doesn't mean it can't be done virtually, but I think it gets done faster and it gets done with more compassion when people are with each other. So I think it's about getting that blend together, and rather than doing a blend for, well, we need to have this mix because that's the mix we need to have, we need to step back and go, what mix will work for what we're trying to do in this particular event and then this particular event, and it has to be bespoke. But I think the biggest thing is, you know, the dollar goes an awful lot further, and we touch people who would never have had the quality of learning that they can now have because we've embraced virtual. So I do think it's that hybrid piece of learning is just like the hybrid piece of how many days do we go to the office a week.
Yeah, and that, Doug, I'll add to that too, right? Just you know, I just look at the current programs we have today at GE. We're now doing these 3-month, 4-month types of programs of where we would have 3 years ago would have probably said we can't do it, right? So it's now more field-based, it's more in the flow of work, et cetera. And we've learned and we've become much more proficient about how we've done it. But then there are these other times of where I just think about like a Kaizen event. You have to be at the shop floor, right? When I look at a new initiative and you've got new team members, what better way to start building that trust than being together, right? I also look at other projects where, you know, if we're together in a room and we just hash it out in a week versus metering that over a period of months with 1-hour meetings. So it's also just, I think, getting better as it relates to the fit and time and purpose by what you're trying to get this done. Because I've seen teams accelerate massively because they've had an opportunity to really get to know each other first in a face-to-face, and it accelerates their virtual journey later on. So that's, you kind of just got me thinking a little bit more about that, Doug, just from what I'm seeing as well, and that we're just getting better in defining those moments where we're used and where we better scale for the dollar that we never would have done before.
I think this piece of knowing people, if I reflect on the Crotonville after we had our modernization, you know, one of the pieces they put in there was a kitchen, and we'd have teams together, and their first event is they're going to cook dinner for each other. Well, when you're chopping a cucumber or you're stirring chicken, it doesn't matter what level you are, you're just stirring chicken. There isn't a senior's chicken stirrer. But what that means is the conversation that happens because there's a third party thing going on meant people got to know the human being. I mean, I do quite often things where I'll get the leaders to share 6 photographs themselves outside of work, everyone in the room before we'll tackle a difficult subject. And because we've seen each other outside of work, we get the human as well as the executive and the leader. And I think Crotonville does that incredibly well, incredibly quickly. Humans helping and working with humans. And again, you know, that all it all rotates all the way back around to trust, vulnerability, respect, good culture. I mean, there's the phrase, you know, the culture of any organization is the worst behavior tolerated.
Yeah, and it's back to that core question, Doug, of where it's like, and I think, and Temi, this absolutely aligns to this corporate university idea, right? Because corporate universities, they exist in a virtual format or a physical format. And in some of those formats, the company may not even own, right, as it relates to physical space. And Doug, you know, one of the challenges you and I were always tasked with is how do we get employees across the globe feeling that ethos, feeling that, okay, we're helping build a capability, we're helping fulfill a strategy, we're helping build the culture, we're helping build a team. And I was in an incredibly fortunate position of being able to work with the regional teams and what they would curate and construct. And oftentimes, Doug, I would reflect when I'd be in that room with a group of leaders and employees together. I'm like, you know what? I'm at Crotonville. I could be thousands of miles away, but I'm at Crotonville based upon what we had curated and what we're trying to solve for in that room together.
Yeah, the how is a constant.
Right.
I love the point about really connecting to the human side. Like it's almost like when you're in person together, you become more human. And so I think that, you know, for me, what I'm taking away, especially with the point around there's no chief chicken stirrer, it's like everybody, we're all equal here, and we all play a part in the success of the evening, and we all have to work together. And I think it's really interesting that you were able to really bring that together in the stories, for the pictures as well. Would you have found that doing that exercise maybe over Zoom wouldn't have had the same impact if you were sort of saying, oh, tell me a story about your baby picture, opposed to sort of being next to somebody and actually feeling that emotion of you know what they were sharing?
Do you know, I would say it's interesting because I probably started doing that virtually before I started doing it face to face, as a way of getting people to because we weren't with each other, because those conversations it's harder just to have a chat you would have over a coffee when you're virtual. So and I think it just all rolls back to when you have that, if I feel safe. And for me, one of the backbones of terrible word you were to use given what I'm about to say, but one of the backbones of Crotonville is helping leaders to help their team understand that they have their back. It's okay to take risks. It's okay. I will protect you, and I'll do my best to make sure you're okay so long as you're trying your hardest. And that piece is much easier when you understand who the human being is. You know, when someone leaves a job, say when Jay wins the lottery, don't forget me, Jay, please.
You're with me, Doug.
when Jay wins the lottery, Jay is, and if he left or retired or whatever, Jay is still Jay, but he's not Jay, the leader of Crotonville. We are given a title of business by our bosses, by the shareholders at the end of the day. And when we forget that and we actually go, we're a human being who is executing on behalf of the people who've entrusted me, we get great leaders.
I like that, Doug, because, you know, it's we have seen just some incredible outpouring of memories and experiences and stories as it relates to where the company has been and where it's going, and getting much more excitement now about the future. And it's what you take in, you know, it's what you take from those moments and continue to build that forward. And Doug's like firsthand example among many of our colleagues around this. And Doug, you're starting to get to this kind of core of what is really good leadership, because you're starting to describe that, right? And I've been so fortunate of having just incredible teams and leaders surrounding me. And Temi, I will say it's kind of like where Doug was starting. These leadership kind of traits or behaviors, they change in some aspects, and in other ones, you know, I could look at a career of 30 plus years and say, here are some themes that I've seen. And Doug, some of the things that you highlighted, it's like it's this advocacy and trust, right? That notion of somebody that's going to have your back. I also put a lot of stock as it relates to a leader that's going to help me problem solve a situation that's facing me real time, right? And that I'm not in that alone. But I would also reflect upon, you know, where a leader's able to see something in you that you haven't quite discovered yourself and brings that best out of you, right? Those are the leaders, and the mechanisms by which you get there, right? It can be in various forms by which you receive that. But I always look fondly back in whatever circumstances, like, okay, somebody saw something, somebody challenged me, somebody helped me along the way, and I was able to discover something that I never saw myself. And that's not only with leaders, but it would be the teams that I would work with and the people that would be part of my teams that I could have that environment with. So as we continue to move this forward, right, Doug, this is where, as you continue to build out the work you're doing, you're kind of awakening groups, right? It's something they haven't seen before. And sometimes also being that brutal truth meter, right, to help them get to a new level of performance.
Yeah, and I think the truth meter, or the teller of truth at Crotonville, it's really interesting because it seems so much more palatable for people, because they knew that the intent was positive to help them, not about somebody saying it so as they have an ego going on. And I think that piece, and I think just a slight tangent to that, the other piece with Crotonville is the camaraderie. And I can give you a live example. I had dinner last night with somebody from the US who was over, who was an MDC I ran in 2016. And he's over in London this week, and he pinged me and said, look, can we meet for dinner? So, and that happens not just from the staff at Crotonville, but also the whole groups of people who've been on various sessions and meetings and programs together. And I think that network, whether the people are still with the business or have left the business, it strengthens everyone's leadership. And it's kind of one of those things you kind of hang on to it for a long time. And the person I was with yesterday, James, he was talking about in MDC, there was groups of 10 people. They're all still in touch.
That's amazing.
And we're 7 years after that meeting. So, it's not just us telling you what we'd like to hear. I promise you, the evidence is also there as well, that this kind of secret sauce has some significant longevity, and I say hopefully makes people happier doing what they do. And if they're happier, the people that work for them are happier. And I guess the final group of people we touch through the work at Crotonville are the people we never see. It's the husbands, it's the wives, it's the children. Because if I'm working for a great boss, when I go home at the weekend, I have a great weekend with my family. If I'm working for a boss who's not great and I'm scared for my job, people that we don't even pay don't have a great weekend. And I think what we do really well in Crotonville and senior leadership learning is help people to be that boss that makes the people we don't even see have a great time as well.
So when they go back, they're having a positive experience in their own life, and then it just means that it helps you with retention ultimately, because they want to continue working for you. Last question I have: if you could pick one favorite memory that you have from your time at Crotonville. Jay, you're looking like, how can I choose?
It's very challenging.
Too many.
For one memory.
If you could just focus on one, what one memory would you share?
Yeah, Doug, maybe this is the one I get to think a little bit about. Maybe if you have a more ready
answer. Sure, I do. And it kind of walks the talk for me as both sides of the channel. So when I joined the executive team, my boss at the time sat me down and she said, Doug, it's going to be great. We're going to send you to Singularity University with 20 GE officers. These are at the time, the top 200 leaders in the business. I'd only ever met one or two in passing. And I thought it was going to be the shortest lived job ever. Going out to this place, creating what we were going to do for these 3 days, then having a whole day to make it make sense in our world. And I was terrified. And I kept just checking, are you sure I'm doing this on my own, Kimberly? She said, Doug, go and do it on your own. So I went and I did it. And I'll be honest, until probably halfway through, I thought I was going to be getting an early plane home, just my own self-doubt. And I did the session. The feedback was fortunately very good. I made some good friends with the officers that I'd seen there. And when I came back, I did ask my boss, I said, how come you took, because that was a huge risk. And she said, one of the things we do here, Doug, is we're here to notice what people can do before they can notice it themselves. So I knew you'd be fine. It was only you that didn't know that. And I grew probably in that 1 5-day experience more than I probably grown in the past 2 years. And that for me is the magic of Crotonville, because we do that to the people who come through it as well. So it's interesting. We do it to those who work there, and also, so we walk the talk on both sides of the sidewalk. So that was my amazing experience.
That actually leads into what Jay was saying, that a good leader is a leader that's able to see something, in their employees that the employee can't see. And that's exactly what your leader was doing for you. So
and what happened from that is everything else that was going to be a big challenge was less of a challenge, because I didn't just learn how to do the one thing. I learned the process to make it okay. And you know, that for me was such a life affirming move for me to be able to move to a different set of what I needed to do, from the more junior people to really junior and super senior people, and then realizing that we're all human beings actually, and we kind of, the same stuff makes us tick no matter where we are.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you for sharing that. Do you have anything, Jay?
Yeah, so tell me, you know, I think about this because you have these crucible moments in your career, right? So there's so much I could relate, and Doug could relate as it relates to just those moments from what we've had on the job and what we've been able to do right up until this very moment of the work I'm doing today. But I'll put this more in the construct of just my own personal learning perspective. And I think one of the, in a Crotonville context as it relates to a class, that's why it's difficult, right, to just kind of pin it down to one, but I'll put it in that construct. And look, I remember early 2000s, I was a global supply chain manager. We had just gotten through a pretty rough patch of a business cycle, and we're starting to get the business healed again. But I tell you, it was a pretty rough set of dynamics after we had gone through an integration and trying to drive just the performance to our customers and a lot of demands. It was one of the higher volume moments in my career that we had to solve for. And I had a great leader at the time helping me through that. And it was during that time I had an opportunity to get away for 3 weeks at the manager development class at that time. And, you know, at that time, part of the norm that we have at GE is when you're attending a Kaizen, when you're attending a learning environment, you focus on the learning. Your day job goes to the side. So I was able to delegate everything to the side and really focus on myself. And in the course of those 3 weeks, I look at that as like I could never afford to go away for 3 weeks today, and nor should I have to, just given the way we're able to deliver content. Knowing that the company invested and I was able to engage with leaders and peers at that time to just think through a different lens of how I was working with my teams, a different lens as related to how I was showing up every day, a different lens as related to staying connected to a strategy as well. I'll tell you, that was for me a moment in time that I'll never forget, because Doug, it goes a bit back to yours. I still remain in contact with a number of those folks from that class, 20 plus years ago, right? In some form or another. And and this can be any learning organization, Temi, right? If you have the investment, if you have, and this is, I think, a period of over decades, Doug, this is built, you're just setting up the right construct for a company to truly become a learning culture. And that's something I've always just have admired in the company and for all the people that have contributed to that. And it does give me some excitement, right? A lot of great reflections as it relates to the future of GE and the future of learning. And I'm able to see it at firsthand where a lot of those norms are being developed and driven and continuing within these three businesses. So that's where I get excited as well, that journey continues. And the fun part for me now, and Doug, is part of what you're seeing, is discovering, okay, what is that next, right? What's that going to be as it relates to how we continue that journey and heritage for this new context that we're in? So those are some of those reflective areas here, and that I just continue to just encourage to see as the company evolves to what this next future is for everyone at the company.
Thank you so much. Thank you both. I didn't know, I was looking at you, Doug, because it looked like you were about to say something.
No. Yeah, you've summed it up. You've summed it up beautifully.
Yeah. No, they were both beautiful stories. Thank you both so much. This is now the end, but no, thank you so much both for joining us and just sharing. And I love listening. It was just great. Like, it was like Jay would say something, then it would blow naturally to Doug.
Oh, Doug Scott, like, how can you not, right?
I mean, nice. Just,
I know you took a long time, Jay. We should do a double act after this.